everybody, my name's Kristy and welcome to this session about working with remote teams, connecting through the virtual interface. I'm going to talk to you today about how building connections whilst working remotely can truly bring value for yourself and your colleagues through your working relationships. And I just want to start off by saying that it really is the small things that you do every day that count. There's no big one silver bullet that will make your working relationships virtually, more expressive and more deep and meaningful. It's about those small things. And some of them may sound a little bit creepy, but I promise it's not as creepy as it sounds. So 3 talking points we'll look at today will be how emotional intelligence and specifically empathy can enhance your working relationships. Ideas on how you can build rapport. Of course, these are just some tips from myself that you can always add to. And then finally, the importance and the impact of the technology that you use on a daily basis. So I want to pose 2 questions to you. What if you've never met your colleagues face to face? Perhaps you've joined a new team during these strange COVID times where we've been remote working from home. And potentially, what if there's actually no plan to meet in person when all of this is over? So we've all had some experiences of working with remote teams now, but what can you do to take that forward into the future? So just to say, the countries with the purple blobs on here on the map are countries that with teams I've worked with and been very fortunate enough to visit over my career so far. But also I've worked with teams in all the countries that are here labelled in pink. So hopefully I've got some good credibility with you to build on this topic. So there are 3 main challenges that I felt like I've experienced, and perhaps you have as well. And if you're nodding away at any of these 3 points, then you're in the right place for the next sort of 15, 20 minutes. So when working with remote teams, do you ever feel emotionally and physically distanced? Have you got experience of working with different culture and different first languages? And then how do you feel about like understanding concepts in the remote world? When you're not physically in a room together, when you can scribble down ideas on post-it notes and things like that. So hopefully as we go through the slides, you'll be able to pick up some practical tips to help you with these main challenges. So we're going to start with my own personal journey, and we're going to go back in time, back to 2006. So in these days, I was working for Kodak on a global rollout of a bespoke data capture system. We were using WebEx as our tool, no webcams, and something happened that I'm going to call the IMI, which would be the instant messaging incident. So to kind of set some context for you, I'm based here in Leeds in the UK, and my colleagues I was talking to were in Colorado Springs over in the US. And there was a group of 4 of us having a meeting, as you do, 2 different locations. But within this instance, we actually had a 3rd location because my 2 American colleagues were working from home at the time. And we were having a screen sharing moment. And something happened. A message popped up. Now, I'm sure, at some point we've all been here when someone's been sharing a screen on a call and you've maybe seen something you shouldn't have done. So I'd just kind of like you to take a moment to reflect on how you would feel in this particular situation. So there was a lot of outpouring of frustration in this message. There was wording along the lines of the project wasn't going to go anywhere. And just a real moment of kind of clarity came through with this message that I was not supposed to see. So before I go through what we did at that particular time, I'd just like you to take a moment and think about, what would you do in this situation? Have you been in this situation, and what steps did you take to kind of bring the conversations back round? So at the time, it was clearly a shock in the first instance. We were ploughing forward with, as I say, a rollout of this data capture system, and it was, full steam ahead. We'd already done Europe. We were partway through Asia, and our US colleagues were clearly from the message not as on board as perceived. So we paused the meeting basically address the situation that was in front of us, just to kind of pause, reflect, and we close the call. To still kind of not in an angry let's put the phone down on each other way, but more in a acknowledgement that we needed to work through a few more things rather than carry on with the agenda that we had in front of us. So the main thing here is just take some time for reflection, and if it's something that does happen to you in the future, pause, take a moment, take it in, and then try and move forward. And for having that time for reflection, I do genuinely believe it made our working relationships a lot stronger. So some ideas, perhaps some prevention ideas, but also some things that you could do if this does happen in the future. So things like exercising your empathy. I, at the time in my career, I really didn't have a good view of what was happening from other people's viewpoints. So, what did the change mean to them in their daily lives, rather than just focusing on what I had to do? It was how would that change impact them as individuals? Taking time out for those water cooler chats, because if you've created like a safe space to have conversations, then perhaps there wouldn't have been a need for an instant message to pop up in that call. Perhaps they would have felt more comfortable coming to me in the first instance just to discuss some, concerns that they had before it built up to such a, an outpour of frustration in the message. So actively listening to your colleagues when they're talking to you, being curious, probing, asking questions, making sure that, if people are not on board with the projects that you're working on, why is that? Pick up the phone, speak to them, create some social time even, something, whatever time of day suits you and the time zones of the people that you're working in, but maybe have like a bit of a lunchtime break to say, let's just play a bit of online Pictionary, something that would connect you as people that has nothing at all to do with your working environment, something that makes you be more human to each other. And this like creepy thing that I know I mentioned at the beginning, if you take the time to really listen, you can pick up perhaps on little personal snippets of information that people share. Things like what's the name of their pet, what's the name of their spouse, if they've got a big birthday coming up, something that allows you to make a note to reference back and, make that connection and be like, I was listening, you are important to me. How, those relationships then can build from that point. And even if you're feeling brave enough, share a bit about yourself. We are all human and we're all trying to get by in the world together. And by sharing some of your story and listening to other people's stories, then that's a way that can come forward and bring value to your relationships. Next, we're going to look at the power of patience. And this kind of does play into the working with different cultures, working with different people with different first languages. So I just want to pose a couple of questions for you to have a think about. How do you feel when you're interrupted? If you're going through your thoughts, and how do you feel if someone chips in? Or, again, how do you feel if someone second guesses what you're about to say? How do you feel? Does it make you feel frustrated? Does it make you feel impatient with that other person? How dig deep and kind of be like, read these questions and think to yourself, actually, how would I feel in this situation? And then perhaps when you're actually in a meeting, if you do accidentally interrupt somebody, or if you're second guessing what someone's about to say, acknowledge that. Make an apology if needed, but just be aware that if that is how you would feel when you experience it, then apply that to how you potentially others could feel if you happen to do that to them. Bringing self-awareness, regulating those feelings, bringing it back round to a level playing field conversation. The next, we're going to continue looking at building rapport and advances in acceptance of technology. So we're fast forwarding 10 years from 2006. I joined a new company in 2016, and there was a new guidance that was particularly uncomfortable for me in the first instance, and that was no video, no call. I'd let that sit with you for a moment, because I'm pretty sure there's a few of you out there that are thinking right now, oh, that sounds terrifying. And to be perfectly honest, I agree. That was my initial reaction. But once you kind of got into the flow of having the camera on, and being able to see other people's reactions like you would do if you were physically together in a room, I started to see the real value in having camera on. I mean, obviously no video, no calls kind of could seem a bit harsh, and there are certain technical reasons why it's not always possible, and taking into account people's comfort levels. Now, in the past, when I've done this talk, I've had some questions in the chat boxes about like, well, what can you do to make people put their cameras on? And I just have to say, you can't. Not the answer you probably wanted to hear, but you can't force somebody to share their home space with you, because that's what we're doing. We're inviting each other into our homes just to kind of like build, to do our work, but within our home environment. So those lines between home and work are merging, and some people might feel a bit uncomfortable with that still. So there's ways around, ways and means. So invite those people to maybe pop a profile picture on whatever platform that you're using, so that when you're interacting and you're talking, you're still seeing a person's face rather than just maybe initials or whatever the platform is that that you're using. And at one point, not long after I joined BT, there was a particular project we were working on, and we were having calls just to kind of prep for a workshop. And when we actually got to the physical location, a couple of my colleagues spent a good 10 minutes talking to each other before they realized who they were from the calls, because neither had been using their cameras and neither had a profile picture on. So it just makes those, if you are fortunate enough to see each other in real life at some point in the future, by putting a profile picture on there, you're giving people half a chance to know who you are when you walk in the room. So maybe just give that as a consideration. But also going forward for first impressions. Previously, there was a science researchist called Albert Morabian, and he was doing some theoretical work in the 1970s about communications and relating to our thoughts and feelings around first impressions. So according to Albert, 55% of the information we receive about somebody is to do with their body language. 38% is due to do with the tone of voice, and then back down to 7% is the actual words that we use. So if you're going to sit with you for a little bit on that, and I'm going to turn my camera off just to demonstrate some differences. So I know I'm only a small picture on screen against the slides, but now that you're listening to me only with voice, tone of voice and the words, you can't see my hands moving around as I have been doing, you can't see the smile on my face, can you still infer how I'm feeling from just the words that I'm saying and the tone of voice I'm using? You know, potentially, are you going to be able to pick up on information from your colleagues or how they're feeling about a given situation just by their tone of voice and their words? So I'd invite you to have a think about that as the day goes on, and consider maybe popping your calendar on and inviting others to do the same. Because it's really nice to see a smiley face in these times. Bring a bit of positivity into people's lives. And again, if you're not feeling like you want to put your camera on, that is also totally fine. If you've got smaller groups on like a one-to-one basis, maybe consider popping your camera on for that. Certain considerations, if you're meeting somebody for the first time, pop your camera on for that, just so that you can help with these first impressions and the stats that Albert worked on in the 70s. Moving on now to the impact of technology. So I'm going to talk about calendars to begin with, and it's a tool that we all use, hopefully in our day-to-day lives. So just to kind of consider a bit of stakeholder management, colleague relationship building of kind of like your availability. So, you know, on a day-to-day basis, because we're limited perhaps in those times of interacting when you go and get a cup of tea. You know, you may be not able to just slip into the conversations, or I'm going to be on holiday next week for a couple of days, or I really need to just take some time out because for my own well-being, I'm not feeling particularly well at the moment. You know, you might just want to pop an out of office email on to let people know when you are going to be available again, and an alternative contact. You know, because if somebody has a question for you with regards to a project, and you haven't sent a calendar invite out to let them know you're unavailable, which is personal choice. Perhaps if they were to receive your out of office email and they knew when you wouldn't be available, or when you were rather coming back into the office, or who to contact alternatively to get some answers, you're helping them still progress with the project, because you can't be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're not superhuman, we are human, and it's all about kind of just making sure that there's an alternative way for people to get information that they require over projects if you're not available, or if you happen to take some time out for your well-being. It probably helps you to know that there's somebody else there to pick up some work, somebody else that your stakeholders can go to actually get information, to give yourself the time to breathe and recollect yourself to come back. So some examples of collaboration tools that are out there at the moment that I've personally used and found to be very valuable. It's not an exhaustive list. Clearly, there will be more different types of tools out there, and be great to share on different platforms your things that you do use. So working in agile software development, I've used Jira and Azure DevOps. And the key thing about these ticketing systems is giving visibility to information. So when I go as a business analyst, go into like a backlog refinement session, each user story that we talk about, I make sure there's notes on the ticket from that particular meeting and any other meeting where we talk about that story. So we've got a reference point to come back to. And then people can also self-serve. If my product owner just is wondering what's going on with that, we're not physically in the same location, so it's difficult for her to, shout over the desk what's going on with this ticket. She can go in, she can see for herself on the tools and things like that. So putting down when you've spoken about individual pieces of work is a reminder for me. I find it really useful, but it's a way to helping others self-serve. And similarly with like virtual collaboration spaces. So they're using things like Confluence, SharePoint, virtual whiteboards. I mean, this time, a couple of years ago, wouldn't have even heard about Mural or Miro, Google Jamboard, but they are great examples of how you can be collaborative, use it for facilitation in workshops, and bring people together to share their ideas whilst you're working in this virtual world. Much more effective than like sharing a PowerPoint and one person typing on screen, because people get the opportunity to think for themselves and write their own post-it notes in the virtual world, as opposed to sticking an actual real post-it note on the wall in a real world. And then lastly, some examples of communication platforms. So I'm sure we're all becoming very familiar with things like Teams, WebEx, Slack, and Skype. But dig into kind of the other functionality that these platforms have. It's not just for like video calling and screen sharing. There's also things like status updates, like on Slack. You can pop in just a status to say out for lunch. Well, out for lunch, but maybe you're having lunch away from your workspace. So that again is that stakeholder management, owning your own time to say, look, I'm not going to be back for an hour, so they know that they can contact you when you're back, and you can disconnect for a particular portion of time during the day. Even if you want to take a walk, it's getting a bit lighter earlier in the mornings and later in the evenings, but still the best time to get a bit of daylight is around the middle of the day. So if you just want to put a status update on there that says, I've gone for a walk, back in half an hour, people are going to know that you're available and when you're not available, and it just helps kind of qualm any of those frustration moments of, but I need an answer now. You've told them when you're going to be back, and it's about kind of being kind to each other and acceptance that we just might need to take more of a break from our workspaces during this time, because working from home, there can be that misconception of you end up like working longer hours because you're not physically going anywhere. And I'll just finish this off, or I'll just get stuck into that. Time management, it's important for your well-being, and it just kind of, if you can put that into your day-to-day and role model those behaviors, then maybe other people will take that on board as well. And of course, the age-old technology of the telephone. pick up the telephone if you really want to just talk to somebody. Sometimes when you were reading messages online, the full tone and purpose behind those messages can get lost. And if you feel as though there's some confusion in messages going back and forth, pick up the phone, talk to that person, see what it is that they're digging into, and how you can help. So finally, what we've looked at is how emotional intelligence and specifically empathy can enhance your working relationships. We've looked at ideas of how you can build rapport, and I'd love to connect on LinkedIn or Twitter and find out what other ideas you've got for building rapport within your teams. And then finally, the importance and the impact of the technology that you use. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your International Women's Day.